I have learned over these years would be of relevance in the future also. Unlike now, deciding which career path to choose was easy when I was in the university. It was easy because the options for employment were very limited. Becoming a government servant had a great deal of charm, and if one got into the IAS, one virtually thought that one had won the world. So most of us sat in the combined civil services examination. I was lucky to be selected, and I thought that now that I had got into the IAS, I could predict what would happen to me over the course of the next 30 years. The path was pretty straightforward. Strangely, the course which I actually followed was quite different from what I thought I would follow, and surprises kept coming my way. In 1963, I was selected to go for a course in development economics in the United States. Never thought I would ever get there. In 1967, I was deputed to go and work in Jammu and Kashmir. Then in 1976, Mr. Krishnamurthy, the then CMD of BHEL, asked me if I would like to work in the public sector and BHEL, which was his really creation at that point of time. I did join BHEL in 1979. Then in 1981, Mr. Krishnamurthy again asked me if I would join the newly formed Maruti Udyog Limited. I accepted. And within a year, I had to make a choice whether to go back to the civil service or to resign and get absorbed in Maruti. All advice was against resigning. Everybody thought that in the IAS, it was a predictable career path. One knew where one would get. One would be hopefully ending up as a secretary to government, at least, if not as a cabinet secretary, whereas they said, Maruti, it's a political project, it's a public sector, it has nowhere to go, why do you want to take the risk? For some strange reason, I took the risk. And I am where I am now. The normal course for an IAS officer is, of course, he becomes a district magistrate, he becomes a commissioner, and if he's lucky, a secretary to Government of India. I can now look back and say the only post I made out of this course was a district magistrate for a little over a year, and did not become a commissioner, did not become a secretary to government. The point I'm trying to make was that it's very hard, at least then it was very hard, to plan a career, and you should be willing to be flexible and accept opportunities which come your way. In those days, an IAS officer after retirement had very few employment opportunities, and at 55, you were sitting back at home with nothing to do. The best which could happen was if you had been working in a ministry like the Ministry of Industry or Commerce or something like that, you could become a liaison officer to one of the commercial houses. What happened to me after retirement was hard to predict. Certainly, I could never have thought that I would reach a position where I would be invited to deliver a convocation address at TAPMI. So I wonder how much value there is in doing what many of us do, which is spending long hours thinking about how to plan one's career, how to plan the future steps, and that generates some stress also, because not often do you get what you plan. And my advice today is do whatever job you have to the best of your ability, and if you do that and make a success of what you're doing, Opportunities will come your way, and you must be willing to take some risk and accept new opportunities. I have often wondered why I did not follow the normal path of a civil servant and why I came into this route of getting into management in industry and such things. I think one reason was that I had no preconceived ideas of what being an IAS officer meant. I certainly did not believe that by passing an examination, I had become a different person, that I had achieved all that there was to achieve, and that I knew everything that was to be known. Because one of the weaknesses of people in this service, and which is often criticized, is the know-all kind of attitude which civil servants exhibit. Fortunately, I knew my limitations, and I only wanted to do my job as best as I could. And I realized that to do that, one had to always be a learner. You had to keep learning in whatever job you did, in whatever position you had. You could not take the view that you did not need to learn, and if you kept an open mind and learned, you would actually succeed. For example, when I was posted as Agricultural Production Commissioner in J&K, or later as Joint Secretary in the Ministry of Power, it was quite apparent to me that what was involved in these jobs was something about which I knew absolutely nothing. And one advantage you have when you take on a job about which you know nothing is that if you start learning, and you start learning from different people, you will end up very soon knowing more than any one single person knows, because you're learning from a different lot of people. And I think that is the important lesson. When I came to BHEL and Maruti, it was a totally different kind of learning, because what you do in government and what you do in a commercial company are different. In Maruti, there was one big difference. Nobody in Maruti at that time knew anything about how cars should be made. And therefore, there was nobody in the company from whom I could learn. All the learning had to be done from outside. So, learning should always be a priority. Don't think that today's completion of your graduation or getting a diploma now tells you all that there is to know about management. You are just beginning. You are a learner. Learning is a lifelong process. It never ends. And you can pick up ideas and thoughts from all kinds of unexpected sources. Let me illustrate this from my experience in Maruti. The standard operating procedures for the shop floor were prepared first in 1983 by our engineers in consultation with Suzuki engineers. Since Suzuki had long years of experience in making cars, one could be forgiven for thinking that these standard operating procedures would be perfect and could hardly be changed. However, Suzuki advised us to start quality circles and Kaizen activities, and this was started somewhere around the mid-1980s. It took a few years to educate the workers on how to actually make effective suggestions from quality circles and from Kaizen activities. It doesn't come easily. You have to teach people how to do it. There was an opposition from our engineers also, who thought that workers who were only ITI certificate holders could hardly make suggestions which would improve on what they, who were graduates from IITs and engineering colleges, could not do. And initially, they were all quite skeptical about this business of quality circles. Experience has proved them totally wrong. Every year, tens and tens of thousands of suggestions from the workers are implemented. Savings arising from these suggestions this year would be over 250 crores of rupees. Over the last more than 20 years, large improvements in productivity and quality and savings in cost of hundreds of crores have resulted from the suggestions and ideas given by workers who, as I said, are only ITI certificate holders. The lesson is the workers who actually work on the machines actually have a lot to teach people who have no hands-on experience but have degrees from prestigious institutions. Never underestimate the value of hands-on experience, and I was glad to hear today that in TAPME, you actually encourage the students to go and get some hands-on experience. I think this willingness to do work with your hands, to go out in the field, is something which will stand you in great good in the future. I have found that to learn from others, you have to be humble and not exhibit an attitude of superiority based on your position or education. The most important thing I found was to be able to tell your subordinates, I don't know. So anything comes up and you want to learn from somebody, tell him, look, I don't understand this, will you please tell me? And if you do that, your subordinates will open up and you should be able to listen to them with sincerity. Another lesson from the Maruti experience is the importance of doing things yourself and going out to see things for yourself. The Japanese have made this actually into a management practice. Academic knowledge is certainly necessary and in fact critical for a complete understanding of any activity. However, you will achieve better results only if you acquire practical hands-on experience and knowledge. If you are in the marketing area, you should spend a couple of years in the field actually selling the products of your company. Unfortunately, we can't get this done with the business graduates we recruit in the company. Nobody wants to go out and actually sell cars. They all want to sit in the offices and devise strategies on how cars should be sold without actually having sold a car. I think that's really not the right way to go about it. Similarly, if you work in a manufacturing company, and I know not too many MBAs work in manufacturing companies, you should work on the shop floor in the production area for some time. When the British were in India, they insisted that even those in the ICS should actually work in the field for many years before they came to the Secretariat. That improved the ability of policy making and gave the ability to understand how policy should be framed so that it could be effectively implemented. Today, one of the most important shortcomings in our country is poor implementation. We make excellent plans, we make excellent projects, they are as good as any made anywhere in the world. When it comes to implementation, we must be amongst the world's worst implementers. Projects get delayed. You've heard an ex-prime minister saying that only some 14 or 18% of the benefits reach the actual beneficiary for whom the project is being implemented, and that's what is wrong in our country today. Poor implementation of policies, programs, and projects. Policymakers really know the actual conditions in the field or the capabilities of the people working there. It's important that when you frame a policy, it should not necessarily be a policy which has succeeded in some other country or a project which has worked in that manner somewhere else. You should also know the conditions and the people who are going to implement it here in India, what their weaknesses are, what their strengths are, and what will work and what will not work. And that is why when foreign companies come to India, one of the things which they are told is, use Indians in management to understand how to do in India. Don't just bring and transplant your experience of other countries in India. It will not work. So my suggestion to you, based on my experience, is please go and get some field experience and do not only work in air-conditioned offices. To achieve better results, and this is to get better implementation, it is also necessary to get into the details of any program or project which you are proposing or which is being implemented through you. Micro-level thinking is required. We often think that people who are in managerial positions should only do macro thinking, and micro thinking should be left to the lower staff. I have found that that is actually what happens, and it leads to poor implementation and unintended results. This does mean that as the boss, you have to work long hours, but the results will justify your efforts. Everybody below you will become more careful in preparing projects when they realize that they would have to explain the details of how it would be implemented, and then would also be accountable for failures, because they cannot blame the lower staff for having done it in a wrong manner. So please don't be afraid to get into micro details of what you are doing, especially in the first several years of your life, and always ask your subordinates exactly how the project is going to be implemented. People in the kind of positions you will be expect respect. As I said in the IAS also, when you held a post, you expected respect because of the office you hold or the position you hold. Actually, what they see as respect for them is not respect for them, but it's actually respect for the power which they have because of the chair they sit on. If you really want to be respected by your subordinates, you have to earn that respect, and you have to earn that respect through your knowledge, your vision, your superior knowledge of work, and your ability to guide people so that they can achieve better results. Subordinates are very observant and quick to judge their bosses. If you want to be a real leader, you have to earn that through your actions and not words. You have to practice what you preach. You have to demonstrate what you want people to do. Set an example. Don't expect others to do things which you are not doing yourself. The Japanese believe that everything can be done better every time around. Kaizen is based on the thought that everything is capable of being improved. Continuous improvements make for competitiveness. If you're not making continuous improvements in whatever you're doing, fairly soon somebody else will become more competitive than you are. One of the reasons why Indian companies lost competitiveness till 1991 was because in the absence of competition and other motivations, people were just not looking at making improvements. Whatever product they made 30 years ago continued to be made 30 years later. And when competition came or a new entrant came, they were wiped out. Maruti came, both Hindustan Motors and Premier Motors got wiped out, although they had been in the country at that time for 30 years. So the requirement of competitiveness is to please continue to make continuous improvements. These improvements will happen if you get your workforce aligned with you, if everybody working for you is also looking to make improvements, and they're motivated enough through your leadership to make improvements. When there is a failure to achieve an objective, you need to do a root cause analysis to identify the real reasons for the inability to achieve that goal. We usually do not do what I call a root cause analysis, because root cause analysis requires you to go not only to the first level of why you failed, but to the second and the third and fourth and sometimes the fifth level of why failure took place. You have to ask why several times before you come to the root cause. It's easy to find an alibi for failure. In government, we were very good at finding alibis for failure, and we never thought that there was anything wrong in what we did. If something didn't work as it was supposed to work, it was somebody outside who was responsible for our failure. And if you don't recognize a failure, you will never improve, because improvements can only happen when you recognize a failure and find out the reasons for that failure and then apply correctives to why that failure took place. Today, people wonder whether it's possible to do business ethically and honestly. Unfortunately, we have created an environment where ethics and honesty are given